welcome back. This is Geek Squad with Adobea Biritwum. Geek Squad is brought to you by MTN. MTN, everywhere you go. If you are just joining us, tonight we are having a conversation about starting a podcast in Ghana, your ultimate guide. I have with me two amazing gentlemen. I'm calling them amazing gentlemen because they host some interesting podcasts here in Ghana. And the first guest I have with me is Joseph Inti. He is the host of Sincerely Accra podcast. Joseph, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'll be coming back to you very soon. I also have with me Adrian Daniels. He is the host and producer of the Sound of Accra podcast. Adrian, you're welcome.
Thank you.
We are going to have a conversation about starting a podcast in Ghana. And I know that the both of you are hosts of podcasts. And one of the things that happened when I posted the flyer for our show tonight was I had people giving some comments. And one of the things that came up was that they would like to hear the signature intro from Joseph. But before we do that, I'd just like to find out from you listening to us, do you listen to podcasts? And what are some of the experiences that you have had listening to podcasts? You can share with us on the WhatsApp number 055 1111 997 055 1111 997. Let us hear from you. Do you listen to podcasts? And what are some of your experiences? So, Joseph, I'll be coming to you first. Will you give us the signature intro?
Oh, okay, I have to, I guess. Welcome, people. You're listening to Sincerely Accra. My name is Joseph Inti, and it's brought to you by the GCR Network.
Okay, so there you have it. Felix, I know you asked for this, and there you have it. Tonight, we're having a conversation about starting podcast in Ghana. But somebody may just be wondering, what is a podcast at all? So I'll start with you, Adrian. What is it in the first place for someone who is wondering, what are we talking about this evening? What are the things you can share with such a person?
Well, in terms of what a podcast is, I mean, this goes back to early 2000s. So essentially, it's effectively an audio recording. So we all used to listen to radio where it's all live and it's broadcasting. But with podcasts, it's a beautiful thing because it's actually recorded. So you can actually record it and it takes away the pressure of someone that's live who's on radio. So because you can actually record this audio format, this media format, it actually gives you a lot of opportunities in terms of how you can approach, being able to do it.
Okay, so I like the fact that you said it's not live like what we are doing right now. And yes, because we said live, we are live on Facebook and YouTube at Joy 99.7 FM. Just in case you want to see what's happening in the studio, you can just hop onto any of our social media handles at Joy 99.7 FM. Okay, so thank you for that. I'm going to ask you, Joseph, when it comes to podcasts, we know a lot of the times it's about audio. Do we have people also doing video podcasts?
Well, video podcasts are kind of the in thing right now. We started our podcast in 2017. And
Interesting.
yes, 7 years this year. And it took the network that we're assigned to a lot to convince us to start doing video because I felt like video was a lot of work. You have to think about what you're wearing now.
Yes.
But when it's audio, you just go in and record. But every single audio podcast was now recording video worldwide and then also in Ghana as well. So the new trend now is podcast, even though they are an audio thing, now there's video. So everybody's doing video now. In fact, if you're a podcast and you don't have video, it's like you're not following the trend. People are not going to discover you at the same way, almost.
Wow. Because that was the next thing I was going to even ask you that. How has it been in times past and then now? So you mentioned the video aspect. Is there any other thing you like to touch on again? How that been in times past and how podcast is now?
I mean, people are paying attention now. Okay. There's a lot more variety here in Ghana. When we started doing podcasting in 2017, when you get your phone, at least the Apple users,
yes,
people want to make space on their phone. So they delete the podcast app.
Rather.
Yeah, because they didn't know what it was. Back then, nobody was really using it. So you delete the apps that will free space. Yes. So we used to go around and say, hey, check us out. And then you realize they don't have the Apple Podcast app. So now they have to download it. But now they have it. There's also different other platforms that you can listen to it on. And like I'm saying, there's more variety. There was a time when there was like only one podcast in Ghana, and now there's a lot more. So I would say, yeah, in addition to video, there's more variety that's going on now. Yeah.
Okay. Adrian, anything to add to that in times past, things you think may have changed for podcasts?
Yeah, I'll add to what Joseph said. So video podcasting is a lot more popular now. So I think especially during lockdown, you saw a lot of people in the 2020s going online and doing Zoom style podcasts.
Yes.
So that became popular around the pandemic period. But now what you're seeing now is people taking the podcast and video production very, very seriously. So you're seeing, 4K, 1080p cameras, production, multiple cameras, and people are recording podcasts as if it's some type of movie or Hollywood production. So a lot more money is going to the video podcast because what you see on social media, IG, TikTok, is this nice, crisp, clear video quality and the captions and stuff. And people want to be involved in all of the action. So they have all of this camera footage going on. So that's what I've seen because I started doing it in 2020, video recording, video podcasts. And I've seen everyone put a lot more effort and time and money into the production.
That is just so true because there are times that you watch some of these podcasts and you can see the kind of microphones being used, the quality of the videos. You can tell that a lot of people are putting in the effort. And I think it's something that is pretty much good. So I'll come back to you, Joseph. You mentioned something that you had to be more or less encouraging people to be listening to you on the podcast. Some people may have even deleted the apps in the first place. So I guess there's something that we just want to talk about. Why is it even important for people to listen to podcasts? There are times that, we know there are educational programs and things, but I mean, if you are to tell us why we should listen to you or anyone in the podcast.
Don't you want to be entertained? Don't you want to learn new things? For me, asking that question in 2024, I think is the same as asking why should people listen to radio, I guess, or even watch TV. Podcasts have become a way for people to also consume content. You know what I mean? And people are getting more interesting with the way they do their podcasts. One thing I would say is unlike something like this radio and TV where there are some formalities and you have to sign in and be very professional, and podcast strips all of that away and you're seeing the personality. And so if you look at the podcasts that do well or podcasts that everybody's kind of like drawn to, there are podcasts that are personality driven, people that are very interesting.
I can say yours is really one.
I mean, you can say that. In fact, I will not be humble. It is. Yeah. So, I think the fact that like it's stripped down is you don't have to go the formal way and you can be yourself. And then another thing, when I was growing up, I was watching like news and stuff like that. You're not allowed to put in your personal opinion. You're supposed to report it and be like objective but now people get to do that. And so if people like your opinion all the time, then they're going to come and listen. So honestly, it's a great way to learn new things. It's a great way to keep yourself entertained. And it's also something to do, passively, because if you are listening to the audio version, you're not watching it. You can be driving, you can be cooking, folding your laundry. So it's easy. And then you listen to it in your own time. If I miss the time slot for the radio show I like, that's it.
Unless it's streamed
It's
live,
streaming.
and then you can go back.
That one's time we got updates. Yeah.
I get what you're saying. I think podcast myself as an individual is something that has really helped me. Sometimes sermons, sometimes interviews with great men that you may never meet. And they sit down and they are interviewed. You get to listen to them. So as you're saying, it's one of the things that people can look at, and it makes it important. If you even miss it, as you said, you can go back and listen to it.
Yeah.
So again, would you like to add anything to that? The importance of podcasts, or what we have said seems to be fine.
Yeah, I think what Joseph said, pretty much hits the nail on the head. So podcasts are consumed for many reasons, to pass time I think, and to be entertained. I think that's what he mentioned, but also I think people need to gain knowledge.
Yeah.
It's a different way of gaining knowledge. So we're so used to YouTube and Facebook, Instagram, all these different platforms to gain knowledge or courses. But podcasts is another way where we can actually learn, from, self-improvement, business, so you said sermons.
Yeah.
So I think it's another way to kind of learn.
Okay. So I'll ask you this. Can anyone at all start a podcast again?
Absolutely. You can start a podcast right now and just get out your phone and download Spotify for podcasts and we can start straight away.
All you have to do is to get your phone. It's just that simple. Will you add anything to that, Joseph?
Can anybody start a
Anyone
podcast?
at all? Yes.
Anybody can start a podcast, but it takes a special kind of person to keep it going.
Can you highlight on that?
No, because you see, everything is work, right? And you really need to mean it. I feel like it's very easy now to say that we want to do a podcast because you can even use your phone to record. That's how we started. We didn't use fancy microphones. I was recording on my phone in my wardrobe, surrounded by my clothes. So that was the soundproof. Yes. Because, so the podcast, I do it with Kwame Asante. He's my co-creator and producer. So I used to sit in my closet, record onto the phone, and I email the the audio to him, right? You need to be dedicated. We have lots of meetings where we're talking about topics, what we should discuss, who we should bring on, so it's not just, oh, I can do a podcast, and you have to have a POV, point of view. So yes, anybody can start it, but if you want longevity, you want to get the engagement and actually go far with it, it takes something extra.
It definitely takes something extra to start a podcast. It's not like everybody is doing it, so I just go ahead and I do it. No. I would like to break it down for someone who is listening to us and would like to go through it. I think I'll come to you, Adrian, for that. We would like to hear from you. Do you listen to podcasts? If yes, can you share with us some of your experiences? What are some of the podcasts that you listen to? We already have a message. Yep, podcast is the best thing that happened in the media space. For me, the favorite podcast has been the BBC ones. Now we use productive time to produce goods and services, rather listen to missed programs through podcasts. With podcasts, you can repeat the listening over and over. Yes, that's so true. Best show was about the sun. Thank you so much, Adusoa. Thank you. Let us hear from you. The number is 055 11 11 997. 055 11 11997. Let us just hear from you on that. So anyone can start a podcast. So can you just take someone through? You mentioned, we've already spoken about the Apple podcast. So if someone is to pick up your phone, like after this show, they said, okay, I want to try this thing out. What can they do? Can you walk us through that again?
Yeah, so if someone wants to start a podcast, there's so many different ways you can do it. So it all comes down to your budget. So if you've got no budget, absolutely no budget, what's something that everyone has, even if they're broadcast, is a phone, right? So you can get out your phone, you can download, for example, I believe it's Spotify for podcasters. It used to be called Anchor, and usually it's an app where you can not only just record, you can also, edit and publish the podcast. And then what that will do is always send the podcast to all the distribution platforms, so Apple Podcasts, Spotify, maybe Boomplay, and some other ones as well. So if you've got no budget, you can go out your phone, you can download apps such as, Spotify for podcasters, and you can get the podcast out there. So that's, if you have a bit of money, you can get a microphone. You can get, for example, maybe a Samsung QTE or the Yeti mic or whatever. Just a dynamic mic if maybe you're not well soundproof, as like Joseph was
sitting in your wardrobe.
Yeah. But if you are well soundproof, then a condenser mic will work a lot more better because it's more intimate. The voice quality is a lot more intimate. So what you can do is then you can hook up to software, like if you've got like a MacBook, like GarageBand or something like that, which is free. Or if you've got a bit more money, there's lots of softwares you can get. And then essentially all you need to do is, upload it to a podcast hosting platform, which is what pushes out the podcast to all the different platforms, Spotify, etc., because it's where it's hosted. Spotify doesn't own the podcast; it's a distribution platform for the podcast itself. So once you publish a podcast to your hosting platform in the choice, I think there's so many demand. There's free. So shout out to AfriPods. I believe your podcast is hosted AfriPods. I think it's free for all African podcasts out there. You can upload your podcast into AfriPods. They'll push out to all of the podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. And then, that's it. It's not too difficult. And that's just audio. And that's not without editing the podcast. That's not including post-production and mixing and mastering. There's so many moving parts. But we'll be here all day talking about it.
Yes. That's so true. We'll just have to start from somewhere. I think that's the main thing. Start from somewhere. And there's so many resources online too, if anyone wants to even go further with this. So what are some of the things that people can talk about if they want to have a podcast?
Everything. The Sincerely Accra podcast we call it a love letter to Ghanaians everywhere. when you are ending a letter, sincerely yours. That's how we got the name Sincerely Accra. So for us, at the time that we started, I was much younger. I'm still young. And we were thinking about, topics that people in our age group would like to talk about, but we don't hear it on the radio because, there are certain words you can't say. So there's no limit. And, aside interviews, we do vox pops. So we were going into the streets and asking people, if you're a fresh graduate, how much is enough money for your salary?
That one, my sister mentioned it, Debbie. She mentioned the over the top.
Okay.
It was something that you guys also did some time back, and she really enjoys that.
Yeah. So the topics it's varied, and like I said, if you have a POV, so for example, I am taking it from like informal, fun, what everybody's thinking but won't say kind of thing. So that can be your POV, and then you can take a more serious approach. There's certain podcasts, like the guy that said BBC, but there's certain podcasts when you listen to them, they're very formal.
Yes.
Hello, welcome to BBC. This podcast, NPR podcasts are so serious. And then there are others where it's always laughter and joy. So the topics is really varied, but it depends on who the host is, who the producer you're working with, and like I said, what's your POV?
A point of view is
Yeah.
definitely necessary. Okay, so Adrian, I just want to find out from you. I know that you host and then you also produce a podcast. What would be your assessment of Ghanaian consumption of podcast content?
Yeah, I think it's on the rise now, for sure, because you're now seeing a lot more distribution platforms like Spotify Africa as well. They're pushing podcasts a lot. I know they've done some stuff with Senior Crowd. yeah, and well deserved. To Senior Crowd has been doing a fantastic job. So I think the consumption is definitely going up. I'm seeing a lot more people now wanting to start it because I get messages from a lot of people saying, hey, you want to start podcasts, or Adrian can mentor me or something like that. So there's a lot more people wanting to get into the space because they want to be creators, right? I think YouTube and other platforms, there's a lot of people on there, but I think now podcast has created a new opportunity for people to, get involved into the creative economy and contribute something which is unique. You can learn voice and personality like Joseph. It can be knowledge, it can be expertise, whatever it is. But there's something for everyone, honestly. If you have a unique point of view, you can literally just niche down and you can run a podcast.
Yeah. And if I can add, so for example, the network that we're signed to, that's the Code Coach Report. They have a lot of podcasts on there. There's one called Sex and Sanity, hosted by Ami, where she's talking about sex, sexual health, and all those kind of things. There's After the Whistle, it's sports, right? Then there's Free Your Mind. So it's different. It really depends on what you want to go with and how you plan to present it to make it, captivating for people to keep coming back.
Okay. So your assessment of Ghanaian consumption of podcasts now?
Definitely, like you said, it is on the rise, and there's also like more variety in the types of podcasts that are out there. If you look to the global markets, there's very different podcasts that exist. And for a while in Ghana, it was the same type of thing. And now we're also seeing the variety as well. It's interesting that you were talking about listening to sermons, because every time when our podcasts come out, I don't know about you, when we check the stats, it's all these gospel podcasts at the top because they release daily, they release daily. Always. So even right now, podcast is changing how people worship.
It's true. It's so true. For me, I think that is what podcast has been for me. It's just been recently that I tried to just vary the kind of things that I listen to, but that's what it has been for a very long time now. Podcast has just been that. We have another message. I love podcasts, especially the sports ones, because it's time convenient. That is, if you listen, you said that is, you listen to it at your own convenience. Kofi Intori. Thank you so much for that. We also have another message. Okay. This is Gideon Amegavi. Okay, one of our guests. He say, listening live bitch show. Keep it up, guys. Thank you so much, Gideon. Thank you so much. Okay. We have another message. Salient thing about podcasts is that it can be listened to anywhere. No location restrictions, like old school radio. Okay, that's so true. I think we're only going to talk about that. We would be talking about that. But this evening, we've been talking about how to start a podcast in Ghana. And I've had with me Adrian Daniels and Joseph Inti. We'll be getting into some more details pretty soon. Stick with us. We will be right back after this.